I guess I'll skip the usual spiel about how I thought I had a perfect marriage. The truth is, our marriage had been slipping for a while, drifting into a kind of quiet estrangement. The real shock wasn't that my wife, Carla, was doing something behind my back. It was how she thought I'd just let it slide. I guess she'd taken my patience and trust as signs of weakness. Let me introduce us. I'm Luke Henderson, 43, and I've been married to Carla, who just turned 41, for over 2 decades. Together, we have a 20-year-old daughter, Sarah, who's in her second year of college. We had a good run, but things have grown stale these past few years. Carla's been distant, barely making an effort. Sure, we still shared moments of intimacy now and then, but it felt more like a habit than anything real. What really threw me for a loop was when Sarah came home for her winter break and uncovered something disturbing. It was her last night at home before heading back to school. I'd been on my computer, so I told her she could use the spare one, Carla's old laptop. 30 minutes later, Sarah stormed into my office, looking angry and confused. "Dad, what kind of weird stuff are you into?" she demanded, holding up the laptop. I stared at her, not comprehending. All these adult videos. What's with all the weird stuff? At first, I laughed it off. "How'd you know about this kind of stuff, Sarah? You're just a kid," I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Oh, please, Dad. I'm not a kid anymore. But seriously, what's all this?" She plopped the laptop in front of me, an untitled folder open on the screen, loaded with videos I'd never seen. Looking at that folder, I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't my stuff. I'd never seen any of it before. After a quick glance at the videos, I realized these were not just random adult videos. They had themes, ones that unsettled me. Sarah was staring at me, waiting for an explanation I didn't have. I finally managed to say, "Sarah, this is your mom's computer. She's the only one who's ever used it." Her eyes widened, and she let out a slow exhale. "Are you saying Mom's into this?" I nodded, still in shock. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Maybe it's research or something." Even I didn't believe that. Still, we kept poking around, finding more hidden folders. Another one contained a series of articles about how to make your husband submissive. It was surreal. These weren't just a few stray files. This was a whole stash. We were both so absorbed that we lost track of time. Only when I heard the garage door opening did I snap out of it. "Quick, close everything down," I whispered. Sarah powered off the laptop, slid it back into the closet, and hurried out, leaving me alone in my office, wondering what exactly I had just uncovered. After Sarah went back to school, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was going on. It wasn't just about those videos or weird articles. There was an attitude shift in Carla that suddenly made a lot more sense. She'd been dismissive of me for months, even belittling me in subtle ways. I'd brushed it off as stress or midlife angst, but now I wasn't so sure. A few days later, with Carla out for the afternoon, I finally had a chance to dig into her new laptop. I managed to bypass her basic password and started searching through her browser history. And that's when I found it. An email account I didn't recognize, buried in her saved passwords. She had signed up for a whole different life under a name I'd never even heard her use. Accessing that account felt like walking into another world. The emails were from someone who called themselves Mistress V. This Mistress V was apparently some sort of submissive coach, offering step-by-step advice on how Carla could train her husband to be more compliant. I read through the emails, each one more shocking than the last. Carla was telling this Mistress V about me, explaining how I'd always been easygoing and willing to compromise. She even described how I'd often let her win arguments to keep the peace. Mistress V's responses were blunt. "He sounds like the type who would submit easily if pressured." In one email, Carla expressed concern about what would happen if I resisted. Mistress V's reply? "Threaten him with divorce. Remind him that if he tries to fight you, he'll end up with nothing and paying for your lifestyle." It was a chilling reminder of how much power Carla thought she held over me. I felt like I was reading someone else's life. This wasn't the Carla I thought I knew, but it was clear that she'd been planning this for a while. The more I read, the more I understood that she wasn't just dabbling in a fantasy. She was actively trying to shift our marriage into something unrecognizable. As if on autopilot, I made a few calls. First to a close friend who recommended a top divorce lawyer, then to that lawyer herself, Jackie Clark. We met 2 days later. After going through the basics of my case, she laid it out straight. Look, I'll be honest with you. If Carla's serious about this submissive husband nonsense and tries to push for a divorce, she's in for a rude awakening. Based on your assets and incomes, she's actually not in a position to take you to the cleaners. If she tries, she'll be on the losing end. Her words gave me a surge of relief. I wasn't powerless. Jackie also suggested documenting everything and finding as much proof as I could. She warned me that Carla's behavior might escalate, and I'd need evidence if things got messy. Leaving her office, I felt a shift within myself. I wasn't going to let Carla run this twisted game on me. Whatever fantasy she was chasing, she'd have to face some real-world consequences if she tried to drag me along. When I filled Sarah in later, her reaction was a mix of shock and anger. Dad, this is insane. She really thinks she can bully you into this? I nodded, trying to keep my tone calm. Apparently, but I'm not going to make it easy for her. You know, Sarah said thoughtfully, maybe you should play along for now. She might reveal more if she thinks you're going along with it. Her suggestion hit me like a revelation. Maybe playing along was exactly what I needed to do. So that's what I decided. I'd be the compliant husband she thought she could mold, at least until I could figure out my next move. For the next few weeks, I kept up the charade. I pretended to accept her dismissive attitude, her veiled insults, even her withholding of affection. I did the chores she handed me without complaint, all while keeping a close eye on her secret email account. Mistress V's guidance became more demanding. Carla was told to criticize my work, to train me by punishing me with silence and withholding. Carla followed her advice like a script, her attitude growing colder and more controlling. But then, one night, I stumbled across an email that made my blood run cold. Carla was bragging to Mistress V that she'd found her bull, a man she planned to bring into her life as part of this twisted setup. I read on, heart pounding, as she described her excitement to test out this new partner before putting her full plan into action. It was all surreal, but one thing was now painfully clear. Carla had gone beyond planning. She was on the verge of crossing a line that I couldn't forgive. I spent the next few days watching Carla's emails closely, noting every detail of her conversations with this bull. His name was Brett, a salesman for one of the suppliers at Carla's business. Their exchanges were increasingly bold, laced with innuendo and plans to meet up again. Each email between them was like a new punch to the gut. This wasn't just Carla exploring some fantasy. She was fully committed, dragging me into it as her unwitting accomplice. After one particular exchange, Brett told Carla how much he was looking forward to meeting me, to putting me in my place. He even joked about how he wanted me to serve him and ensure he was comfortable in our home. It was too much. The guy barely knew me, yet he was talking as if he owned my life. I needed to put a stop to this, but Sarah was right. I had to gather more evidence before confronting Carla, so that when the moment came, there'd be no way for her to manipulate or guilt me. I was building a case, not just for divorce, but to make sure Carla felt the full weight of her actions. A week later, I read an email from Carla to Mistress V that confirmed my worst fear. Carla wrote, "I've finally tried him out. He's everything I imagined and more. I'm ready to make my husband submissive. Friday night is when I'll reveal it all to him." She'd planned the entire scenario, down to what she'd say and how she'd force me to submit to Brett's authority. She was even counting on me to clean up after her sessions with him. As I absorbed the words on the screen, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I'd been angry, hurt, humiliated, but now I was just focused. Carla had a plan, but she had no idea that I had one, too. The first thing I did was call Jackie, my lawyer, and update her on what I'd found. I gave her copies of the emails, the recordings, and everything that could serve as evidence. "You're building a strong case, Luke," she told me. "This should make the division of assets in your favor, and she'll have to pay if she wants to keep her business." Next, I made contact with Brett's wife. I didn't relish the idea of destroying her family, but she had a right to know. I composed a straightforward email, attaching the proof of her husband's infidelity, along with my contact information if she needed to verify anything. Then I hit send. I knew this would be the beginning of the end for Brett, too. When I spoke to Sarah about what I'd found, she was furious. She really thinks you're just going to sit there and let this happen? Not exactly, I replied, sharing my plan with her. Sarah was fully on board, her own anger fueling her support. I gave her a role to play, one that would put Carla on edge and add tension to what was shaping up to be an unforgettable night. The morning of that fateful Friday, I could feel the tension in the air. Carla acted distant, occasionally giving me sidelong glances, as if gauging my compliance. I played my part, keeping my tone neutral, pretending to be clueless. That evening, Carla told me she needed to talk to me about some new ground rules for our relationship. I could barely keep a straight face. She was trying to sound calm and assertive, but there was an edge of nerves in her voice. As we sat down in the living room, I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Look," she began, "there are some things we need to change around here. From now on, I'm going to be in charge, and there's a guest coming over tonight to help you understand what that means." She slid a wrapped box across the table, eyes gleaming with a strange excitement. "Go ahead. Open it." Inside was a chastity cage, something I'd seen in the videos she'd hidden on her laptop. I held it up, pretending to examine it carefully. "So, let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You want me to wear this while you bring someone else into our house to be with you?" "Yes," she said, but her voice was a little less confident. "You'll wear it whenever I say, and only I'll have the key. And if you don't agree, there will be consequences." I raised an eyebrow. "Consequences?" Her face turned steely. "If you don't go along with this, I'll file for divorce. You'll end up with nothing, paying me while I'm with someone else." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Is that all? Just wear this cage, clean up after your boyfriend, and let you have everything?" Carla's eyes flashed with anger. "That's exactly right, Luke." I leaned back, giving her a long, hard look. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah. "Yeah, honey, she's laid down the law." "You wouldn't believe it," I said, deliberately loud enough for Carla to hear. "She even gave me a little cage to wear." Carla's mouth fell open, her calm facade crumbling as she tried to regain control. "Luke, who are you talking to?" I smirked. "My daughter. Our daughter." "You interrupted me, Carla, and that's not very polite." She was speechless. I could see she hadn't expected this reaction from me. Just then, the doorbell rang, and Carla jumped. She looked both thrilled and terrified. "That'll be Brett," she muttered, standing up. I held up a hand. "Actually, Carla, I'd like to talk to Brett myself." She shot me a bewildered look, but I'd already walked to the door. Opening it, I came face to face with Brett, a man about my height, though he looked far less composed than I felt. He grinned nervously, as if this whole thing was just a joke. "Hey, baby, is he all set?" Brett asked, his gaze flicking to Carla. "Actually, I'd like to ask you a question or two," I said, my voice cold. Brett's smile faded. "What?" I took a deep breath. "When you started seeing my wife, did you tell her you were married? That you had a family?" Brett's eyes went wide. He looked at Carla, then back at me. No, I didn't," he stammered. "Did you tell your wife about tonight's little plans?" I pressed, my tone turning icy. The color drained from his face. "No." "Don't worry," I said, crossing my arms. "I took care of that for you. Sent her all the details, along with a few of your lovely emails." At that, Brett looked ready to explode. He clenched his fists, taking a step toward me. "You son of a—" I cut him off, lifting my hand calmly. "I'd think twice about that. See, if you lay one finger on me, I'll call the cops. And I'm willing to bet they'd be interested in hearing how you came over here. Ready to fight for a woman who lied to you and me both." Brett looked at Carla, who was pale as a sheet. "You told him? Why'd you even?" "I thought we were going to make him submit." Carla sputtered, lost for words. It was over. Whatever fantasy they'd built, it had crumbled right in front of them. "You both need to leave," I said, pointing toward the door. "Consider tonight's plans canceled." As they left, I could hear the police sirens in the distance, just as I'd expected. Carla shot me one last desperate look before she stumbled out the door with Brett. I closed it behind them, feeling a strange sense of calm. The worst of it was over, but there was still more to resolve. The next morning, Carla was nowhere to be found, and I wasn't about to go looking for her. I knew she'd likely be at her parents' place, or maybe trying to get Brett to pick up the pieces of their broken plan. But I wasn't interested. My focus now was on the divorce, on closing this chapter of my life for good. I called my lawyer, Jackie, and told her everything that had happened. She was pleased with the evidence I'd gathered, particularly the recording of our conversation, Brett's emails, and the photos. "This gives us leverage," she said. "I think it's time to start moving forward with filing." I agreed. Carla would be served the papers that week. I had no doubt it would rattle her, but this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about getting my life back, free from her deception and manipulation. 2 days later, Jackie called to set up a face-to-face meeting with Carla and her lawyer, someone Jackie referred to as a real piece of work. She warned me he'd likely try every trick in the book to intimidate me or downplay Carla's actions. I was ready for it. If Carla thought she could charm her way out of this, she was in for a rude awakening. The day of the meeting, I walked into Jackie's office with my head held high, my evidence folder tucked under my arm. Carla was already there, looking nervous but trying to hold it together. She smiled at me, trying to play the sweet, innocent wife. "Look, we don't have to do this. This was all a mistake, a misunderstanding." I stayed silent, just looking at her. Her lawyer spoke up, his voice smooth but full of fake sincerity. "Mr. Henderson, we're willing to let bygones be bygones and put this unfortunate incident behind us. If you agree to reconcile, we'll forget all these wild accusations." I let out a small laugh, turning to Jackie. "You said he'd try this." Jackie didn't waste time. She opened her folder and pulled out several photos, sliding them across the table. Carla's face went pale as she saw the images, her composure slipping. There was no denying what they showed, her and Brett together in ways she'd never be able to explain as innocent. "Mr. Henderson," Carla's lawyer started, trying to regain control, "we still insist that this is not grounds for a full divorce. You'll need to provide more substantial proof of actual infidelity." Jackie shook her head, amused. "These images, plus the recorded conversation, are more than enough to prove intent and infidelity in this state. But if you want more, we also have emails where Mrs. Henderson discusses her plans to, let's say, modify Mr. Henderson's role in the marriage in ways that no court would find acceptable." Carla's lawyer stammered, trying to find a response, but there was nothing left to say. I looked directly at Carla. "I'm not interested in staying married to someone who would go to these lengths to manipulate and deceive. I've put up with a lot, but this crosses every line." Carla's expression shifted from defiant to pleading. "Luke, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I got carried away. I thought this would fix things between us. I wasn't thinking clearly." I shook my head. "No, Carla. You knew exactly what you were doing. You wanted to control me, to put me in a role I never agreed to. There's no going back from this." Jackie took over, outlining the terms of the divorce. "Mrs. Henderson's business will need to be appraised, and Mr. Henderson will be entitled to a fair share. Given her reported income and assets, she may have to sell a portion of it to meet the terms of the settlement." Carla's lawyer bristled. "Her business is worth half of what you're suggesting. This is outrageous." Without missing a beat, Jackie pulled out a copy of Carla's recent loan application, where she claimed her business was valued at over $1 million. "According to this document, which your client submitted to the bank, her business is worth exactly what we're stating. If she lied on this form, she's facing much bigger problems than a divorce." Carla's face turned white as she stared at the paper. She hadn't expected us to know about the loan, and it was clear she'd put herself in a bind. She looked at me, eyes pleading. "Look, please. We can work this out. You don't have to do this." I didn't answer, and Jackie leaned in, giving Carla a hard look. "Mrs. Henderson, your client here was kind enough to give you a chance. If you want to negotiate, now is the time. But we aren't backing down on any of the terms laid out here." Carla looked defeated, her once confident attitude completely shattered. She muttered to her lawyer, who reluctantly agreed to the terms. There would be no spousal support, the business would be divided, and the house would remain with me. The divorce papers would be signed, filed, and finalized. As we wrapped up, Carla tried to reach out one last time. Look, can we at least talk about Sarah? She won't even speak to me. Her desperation almost got to me, but I knew better. That's between you and her, Carla. Sarah has her own opinion about what you did, and I can't force her to see things differently. You'll have to deal with the consequences. With that, Jackie and I stood, gathering our things. Carla sat there, head down, barely able to look at me as I walked out. A week later, the papers were officially filed, and we were one step closer to putting all of this behind us. I could see that Carla was devastated. Her business was in jeopardy, her relationship with Sarah was in shambles, and she was now facing the reality of life without the control she thought she'd have over me. As for Brett, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that his marriage was over, his wife having taken their kids and left him after my email exposed everything. The relief I felt was enormous. I'd finally broken free of Carla's control, her manipulations, and the twisted vision of marriage she tried to impose on me. My life was my own again, and I could finally breathe. I didn't feel vindictive, just relieved that I could start fresh. With the divorce finalized and Carla out of my life, I began to feel a new sense of freedom, one I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The weight of everything, the deception, the manipulation, the betrayal, was finally lifting. It was strange at first, adjusting to the quiet in the house and the fact that I didn't have to constantly be on guard. But as the days went on, I found myself settling into the peace of my new reality. My first priority was reconnecting with Sarah. She'd been incredibly supportive throughout the entire ordeal, but I knew that what she'd witnessed would have left an impact. I wanted to make sure she was okay and knew that I was here for her, regardless of what had happened with her mother. One weekend, I invited her over, just the two of us, and we spent the afternoon talking. She was open with her anger toward Carla, frustrated that her mother could betray our family so recklessly. "It's just hard to understand, Dad," she admitted. "She was my mom, you know? I thought I knew her." I nodded, understanding her pain. "I know, Sarah. I thought I knew her too. Sometimes people change in ways we can't predict or control. But that doesn't change how much I love you or how grateful I am for your support through this." She gave me a small smile. "I'll always have your back, Dad. Just don't ever let anyone take advantage of you like that again, okay?" I promised her I wouldn't. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about lighter things, her classes, her friends, her plans for the future. By the time she left, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just living for myself. I had a responsibility to Sarah, too. And if anything, this experience had taught me how important it was to value myself and my own happiness. In the weeks that followed, I started making small changes around the house, reclaiming the space and making it my own. I redecorated rooms, cleared out old items that no longer felt like me, and even took up a few new hobbies I'd always been curious about. I joined a local hiking group, started reading more, and even picked up some carpentry skills, building shelves and furniture to give the house a new feel. Each small project reminded me that I was moving forward, that I was capable of rebuilding my life. As for Carla, I heard through mutual friends that her life hadn't gone so smoothly after the divorce. She ended up selling her business at a loss, her reputation damaged by the fallout of our marriage. She tried reaching out a few times, sending apologetic texts and emails, but I never responded. I wasn't interested in reopening old wounds or dragging out what was finally over. I wished her no harm, but I also knew that keeping my distance was the healthiest choice. The final closure came one afternoon when I received a letter in the mail from Carla. She wrote a long apology, saying she realized the extent of the damage she'd done and hoped I'd one day forgive her. She also mentioned that she was working on rebuilding her relationship with Sarah and was in therapy to understand the choices she'd made. I read it once, let out a deep sigh, and tucked it away. Forgiving her wasn't really about her. It was about me letting go of the anger and hurt. I didn't know if I'd ever fully forgive what she'd done, but I was finally at peace with leaving it behind. Life moved on, and so did I. Gradually, I reconnected with friends, rejoined the social circles I'd neglected during the worst years of my marriage. I met new people, formed new friendships, and even started dating again. It felt strange, a little scary at times, but it was a step toward healing. I wasn't in any rush to settle down, but I was open to the idea of finding happiness with someone who truly respected and valued me. Reflecting on the journey, I realized I'd come out of it stronger, more self-assured. Carla's betrayal had hurt deeply, but it had also taught me important lessons about boundaries, self-respect, and the importance of choosing people who genuinely cared about me. I knew now that kindness wasn't a weakness, it was a strength, and I'd use that strength to build a life on my terms. Sarah remained a constant in my life, and our bond grew stronger than ever. We'd both been through a storm, but we'd come out on the other side with a renewed understanding of family, resilience, and the importance of standing up for ourselves. And, most importantly, we both knew that no matter what, we'd always have each other's backs. As I stood on my porch one evening, watching the sun set over the trees, I felt a profound sense of calm. The past was behind me, and the future was wide open. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I was ready for whatever came my way. Because now, finally, I was free. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.